Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Earthen's Den. And in this episode, I want to talk to you guys about the unrealistic expectations placed in relationships. Now, this is not always going to be pertaining to specifically romantic relationships. I think that this kind of pertains in every relationship in general. First of all, we know that self-awareness and self-reflection is the key to even having a relationship that can do anything. You know what I mean? Like, when you're not self-aware, when you don't know why you do what you do, there's a breakdown in communication, right? And at that point, it's very hard for you to connect with people and for people to connect with you in that way because we don't have empathy and we don't have understanding. And so anything that we don't understand, we typically are really frustrated with. And 9 times out of 10, we're probably just going to give up. What I feel like in regards to every category in regards to relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, I feel like we are in a space where it just happens to be this thing where we just have this perfect picture of how it's supposed to go. And when it doesn't go like that, pretty much everybody is like, okay, yeah, this is not it. You know what I mean? I definitely think that this is birthed from just societal culturing. You know, I think that this is something that's just birthed from, just like movies and just the whole nine. Like we think that it's supposed to be this one thing, and that's why I see so many young women saying they want friends, and it's like they think that this I'm seeing the image kind of go around with like a lot of women who are doing things and activities and things like that. And don't get me wrong, I think that having a strong sense of community and unity is so important, and it's vital just to our spiritual beings. I think it's something that's very beautiful, but it's almost like we are in a space where it's like we don't even realize what it actually takes to have a healthy friendship. It takes communication. There has been times in my life where honestly, okay, I ain't gonna I was about to insert ego there, and I was gonna say, I actually ain't lost nobody. But there's been times in my life where I've lost a friend, and it was due to, this person perceiving what I was doing as something that was, spiteful or something like that. And I see so many of these memes going around. People are like, you know what? I don't have to tell you what you're doing. You already know, right? And I believe that this is really birthed from self-preservation. I really don't think that many people are okay. Honestly, I think that so many people are hurting, and that's okay. But we just have to be aware of it. I really feel like as a child, many of our needs were not met, especially if you're the oldest. And I'm going to have to make an episode on the oldest child because, honey, I was the oldest child. Girl, you had to hold it down. Like, you had to hold down the fortress, okay? Your younger siblings typically don't really connect to the parent. I know for me, I was very empathetic. Like, I was carrying everything my mother was carrying. Everything she was feeling, I was feeling. Anything she wasn't saying, So that was like, I was like attached to her in that way. And, I realized just how, when your needs are met as a child, typically the only love that we know is self-preservation, right? And so it's like everybody's walking around, and that's why we kind of have this whole, what do you want to call it, self-centered culture. You know what I mean? It's because a lot of people, we don't really know what love looks like, right? We don't know what it actually is. And so you have some people who are doing the work, right? And we talk about the work. I'm talking about just, looking out for, therapy and trying to read some books and get an understanding of what it looks like. But I've come to find even with that, you have to be very mindful because there are a lot of people who are selling courses and healing and all of these things, which, don't get me wrong, I think it's a beautiful technique and it opens the door for something beautiful, right? Because we have self recognition, we have a little bit more understanding of why we do, and we can kind of navigate better. But it's almost like it's the same thing with this instant gratification, right? And it's like we just kind of rush into it and we think that we're just supposed to be here or there, or that this course is going to fix all of this, or that this is going to fix all of this. And it's just almost like, I'm not saying that people are doing it for money, but what I am saying is that it's really selling people this false belief that it's going to just turn around, within the blink of an eye. I really feel like when it comes to therapy and self-awareness and all of these things, you guys, like childhood traumas and inner child and all of that stuff, it's something that's pretty much going to always be with you. And I mean, always be with you. I mean, in a sense of like, it happened, you can't change it. But what you do is you move forward and you learn how to manage certain things better. So I just kind of feel like it kind of births this thing to where we almost like detach ourselves from our true nature, because it's like we either don't want to feel it, we don't want to deal with it, or we become so like, I've met people who were just like so in tune with that to where there's like they kind of disconnected from themselves because that part was too painful to deal with. You know what I mean? So yeah, and then I think in regards to romantic relationships, everybody thinks that they're doing the best thing for their partner. And it's the same thing with our parents. Like, everybody thinks that we're doing the best thing. Like, we have the right intentions, but we're not really giving what it's supposed to give. Like, we're not giving the person what they actually need. And we don't really know that until you take your time to get to know a person. I was in the kitchen as I was making my lunch. I was thinking about just how so often, like with older relationships, right? People are like, oh, divorce rates, blah, blah, blah. It's because there's so much information readily available. Yes, some of our grandparents were definitely miserable. And I totally agree that a lot of people maybe have settled. Maybe they were in college and maybe they did actually grow apart. But it's almost like we're kind of in a space where it's like, you know what? I don't even really want to work on it. I'm kind of just like ready to peace out, you know? And I think when you get to a point in relationships, whether friendships, whatever, the purpose of the relationship is evolution. The purpose of the relationship is to be revolutionary in a sense. And like, I learned for myself to be intentional about relationships. Like, why am I coming into this relationship? You know, and I'm not saying like, okay, I want this person to do X, Y, and Z. But I realized for me, I wanted to create that entire narrative of love and relationships and what it looks like. Now, I ain't gonna be doing no swinging. We ain't doing no swinging over here, swinging from the branches. That ain't how I get down. You know, I guess in some senses, you can maybe call it a little bit more traditional. And when we talk about traditionalism, I think we kind of equate it to like, oh, you just this, you know, Bible thumper, hand on the Bible, hand on, you know what I mean? To where it's like, we don't even consider the fact that like traditionalism really is just like another way of saying your values and your beliefs. You know what I mean? And of course that could be different for everybody. I have nothing against people who grow up and, you know, a certain home and a certain belief was, you know, shared to them. And then they say, you know what, as I get older, I'm reading this information, obtaining the knowledge about certain things, and I want to go this way, you know, or I want to go that way. Like, I have no judgment in regards to that. I really have like I don't really have a conversation for that. Like, I think that's just what that person felt like they needed to do for them. And that's completely fine. But for me, you know, I'm not really with all that. So, so just moving forward, you know, I just think that overall we just have these very unrealistic expectations of what it's supposed to look like. It's almost like we're pretty much taught, especially like in the Black community, like we're pretty much taught like it's either going to be aggressive, tolerant, you know, dictative, tyrannical, or it's going to be passive. And, you know, it's almost like, this is why I think we have this whole thing of like the nice guy, right? It's because the movies teach us that it's the guy, the bad boy, right? The bad boy, the guy who doesn't really call you. That's the guy who really wants you. That's the guy who you got to crack the code, right? He's going to just open up the door, honey. He's going to just love you, right? And even with guys, it's like, okay, it's the girl who's super popular, parents were rich, you know, it's all of these like stigmas or whatever, you know what I mean? Super pretty, all the guys want her. That's the girl who's going to fall for the nerd. And you know what I mean? So it's like, and when I say nerd, you guys, like, please, come on, take it lightly. Like, I'm not, you know, there's nothing wrong with being intelligent. There's nothing wrong with wearing glasses. Like, I wear glasses. It's sexy. It's like, I think intelligence is everything. So chill, okay? Like, let's not be super hypersensitive, okay? But no, seriously, so I think that we have these narratives of what it's supposed to look like. And so what happens is I feel like when you have the nice guy who actually has a pretty girl, you know, who is actually interested in him, it's like, is she trying to play me? Is she just using me for my car, right? And then you have the nice guy who is into, I'm sorry, the pretty girl was into the nice guy, but then you have the nice guy who's into the girl, and it's like, I feel like I feel like he's calling me back, right? He's showing me that he's interested. I feel like something's off here. Like, oh, I feel like, you know, he doesn't have me jumping through hoops and loops, right? So I feel like, oh, he's just like, I don't know, he's just weird. Like, something's off. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, you have that. And then I think the opposite side of that as well with the nice guy, it's like, he's doing these things, but now you feel like he's supposed to be that guy who like shows up with the boombox outside your window, and he's supposed to be the guy who's like rolling out the red carpet. And don't get me wrong, like all of these things sound great, but it's almost like it just creates this fantasy, and it's like it's not the reality. So we're all in a space where we've got this like duality in regards to what we're supposed to do, what we're not supposed to do, and how it's supposed to look. And when it shows up, even though it's real, we're like, I think it's supposed to go this way. And when it ain't going that way, then we like, okay, yeah, this is, you know what I mean? And so it's like there's those unrealistic expectations. And it isn't until we become mindful and like cognizant of that we can break it down and really start to identify like, okay, what are my beliefs about relationships? What do I really believe about this? What do I really believe about that? You know what I mean? And I feel like now more than ever, we are totally divided. I think that we are totally divided. I was hanging out with my homegirl, and, you know, typically in the past, I would be like, you know what, this person's doing this, I'm over it, right? And I was like, you know, dang, girl, like, you're always on your phone. And she's like, oh, man, I'm so sorry. Like, you know, somebody told me that before. And so I realized that we don't have that communication these days. Like, we're all in that space where it's like, we want love. You know, we've been in relationships that may not have worked out because, you know, it didn't work out. It wasn't something that was right for us, or, you know, we just kind of feel like, you know, we didn't know how to communicate our needs. We didn't even know what our needs were. And I think so many people are afraid to admit that because it's like, you have to be perfect. You have to be put together. You have to, you know what I mean? So it's all unrealistic, and it's highly unattainable without, you know, awareness, acknowledgement, and just kind of putting a little effort into it. But yeah, so I just think about those situations and how so many people would be like, you know what? I don't really think that this is working. You know what I mean? Instead of just being like, you know what? I kind of feel like you always doing this. And then it's like, oh, okay, you know what? I didn't even recognize it. Like, you know, my bad. Like, you know, and then when they change the behavior, it's almost like we don't want to receive it. We want to feel, you know what I mean? But so it's like you have to learn how to receive your needs and receive the love that you say you want. You know what I mean? And that's, honestly, it sounds like something that's very easy, but it's really not, especially when it's not something that's familiar. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to kind of work at it and give yourself that grace and another person that grace and the liberty to demonstrate, you know, okay, cool. And I feel like sometimes too, it's like, we have to really sit in a space where we're willing to learn. Like, we have to be willing to learn. We have to be willing to learn that, yes, you feel like you did everything you could do, but honey, you were over there pushing all the buttons, all the triggers, and understand that this is totally normal when you haven't had a conversation about what sets your friend off, what you're, you know, and I feel like with women more than anything, it's actually really saddening because we totally invest a lot more into our relationships with, you know, our men versus our women. It's almost like we don't really have those tough conversations, and we don't have that sense of community and that sisterhood in regards to women. But you know what? Hey, I got this. Don't even worry about it. But no, seriously. So, you know, I realized that we have to be willing to put forth that same energy into our other relationships. You know, honestly, put that energy towards everything you want to do, but like put that energy towards developing a relationship with your homegirl. And it's true, you know, we're always willing to bend, fold, stretch, mold, read, do whatever we have to do in regards to our relationships with men, but we don't have that same liberty for our sisters, and that's not right. You know, so I feel like if you're in that space, talk to your friends. Now, I've definitely had relationships with women who it didn't work out, and I think that, you know, that's just, you know, hey, you got to just take that with a grain of salt. Y'all take it with a grain of salt. Like, some people really are stuck in their ways, right? Some people really just have things that they need to work on, and it may just be jealousy, or it may just be insecurity, and it just may fickle and fester into something, you know, and it's something that you cannot do, or, you know, you kind of, I feel like the best thing you can do sometimes in those situations is like give a person that space. And I think that's in all relationships. Like, if you have somebody who's dealing with something and they're hurting you, or, you know, they're not aware, they're not really trying to put in that work, they're in denial, they're, you know, totally invalidating what you're bringing up, I think that at that point you kind of have like that level of like maturity, you know what I mean, and just a little bit of care for yourself, and you're like, okay, yeah, I think it's time for me to let this go. But honestly, I'm not even really here to advise people letting people out of their lives. Like, I think that is just to a situational, intuitive, spiritual type of thing, like everybody knows. So, you know, you just want to be mindful of those things too. Like, just because you go online and, you know, you see something that validates how you feel, and which you got to be so mindful, you guys, you have to be so mindful of that, because social media is an algorithm. So if you feel like this, and this is the pictures you're liking, and this is the post you're making, it's going to feed you that, right? It's going to send you people who are more like yourself. And that's another thing too. It's like, we spend so much time on social media, you know, it knows us better than we know ourselves half the time, right? Or so it thinks, right? And so we believe, right? And so we're thinking that we're in this kinship, but really we're more disconnected than ever, because we don't really feel that way, right? Like, honestly, we don't think people are that bad. And, you know, maybe people aren't, you know what I mean? So it's like, we don't even overall, I just feel like we live in a society where we don't even really give ourselves the opportunity to unlearn and to be open to something outside of what we've always known, right? And that's self-preservation. Like we don't want to consider the fact that, oh, maybe this person actually doesn't feel that way, or maybe this, like we don't take the time to consider that, because we are all in that space where we're trying to meet our needs that were not met as children, and that is self-preservation. So this was just a little episode that I just kind of wanted to talk to you guys about, because I noticed this in relationships and just how these fantasies are really destroying the whole nine. I definitely think you do have to have a sense of non-negotiable, but even still, I feel like sometimes we can be a little bit unrealistic in regards to that too. And the reason why I say that is because you don't really know what you don't want to do until you do it. And then you like, you know what? I don't really want to do that anymore. You know what I mean? Sometimes we come out the gate like, oh, this person has to have X, Y, and Z, but this person may not have X, Y, and Z, but they have A, B, and C, and that's what you need. You know what I mean? So it's like you don't really know those things until you get in relationships and you realize that, and sometimes I definitely think that we have this ability to want our wants versus our needs. And I don't really think that's a bad thing. Like, don't ever feel bad for that. Yes, you may want someone who does this certain thing, but then when you look up, it's like, oh, that doesn't really feel good. You know what I mean? It actually doesn't feel good to have a person in this space encouraging me to do this because this person is actually enabling me. You know what I mean? So it's like, you just have to realize, like, what is it? And I definitely think overall, when it comes to relationships, I really feel like it's about the core values. You know what I mean? It really is about the core values. It's about what are we really connecting on? I think when it comes to interest and things like that, it makes a huge difference. Like, I think that it is important, but it's almost like we kind of confuse that. I'm not really going to get into the whole chemistry thing, because that's just honestly irrelevant, like for the connections that I'm talking about and the relationships I'm talking about. But so I just think that, like, overall, we just have that really strong sense of like fantasy of what it's supposed to be like, and it isn't until we're willing to sit and address it and correct it and realize, like, okay, what is it that I really need? And I don't think that you know your needs until you just happen to be in situations, or you step into spaces and you become a little bit more self-aware and you have a little bit more experience, and what worked one season may not work for the next. So don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work that season, you know what I mean? But I think it's just like following what's true to you, you know what I mean? And like really going through with experiences and not being afraid and like really showing up, because I feel like when you go through an experience and you really show up, you don't really have any regrets. You're not dibbling back and forth because it's like, that you showed up in that relationship and you were vulnerable, and you put yourself out there in a sense of like, being true to yourself. And so when it doesn't work, it's not really a sense of regret because you were true to yourself in that situation. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's like the prime thing. And it's totally okay to change. It's totally okay to, want something and realize that you actually need something else. It's totally okay. I feel like we have to have grace centered around this. And, at the end of the day, it's really about like learning what you need. And I think the best way to do that is to show up, for everybody to just show up, and, you'll realize like, okay, this feels good. This feels true. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of how you can navigate. So at the end of the day, all of this is just self-reliance, you guys. Like, it's about doing what works for you if, that's what works for you. But I think deep down inside, you got to be real with yourself, and you really have to be true. And in regards to what it is that you're about, what it is you're really trying to do, think about long-term, things like that. Like, it's the core things. It's the values, honey. It's the values. So yeah, this was just like a quick little episode in regards to these fantasies, in regards to relationships, friendships, the whole nine. We got to do better because we are more divided now more than ever. And I think that I really have a lot of hope for the future and humanity and the youth, and, so we got to keep that same energy. All right, you guys. And I'm going to leave you guys with your thoughts.